The stories you're about to hear shine a light on strange urban legends that turned out to be true. If you or someone you know has had a similar experience, feel free to share it in the comments down below. I had a football coach back in high school who was also one of my teachers for a semester. He told us one story that freaked us all out pretty bad. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was a lot younger and newly married. He said that after practice one evening, he was making his long commute home, and the route ran alongside just fields and fields of hay and grain. Since it was late summer and early fall, it wasn't even approaching dark yet. His car was an old beat up truck with just a bench seat. Anyway, he's driving along when he sees a hitchhiker. This being back in the day in a small town, Montana, he pulled over to let the guy in without a second thought. My teacher described the man as wearing a really old, outdated style of suit. Not quite a zoot suit, but styled in a similar baggy way. He also had a big, stylish hat. This guy looked like he was out of the 40s and sort of like a pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed, it being super hot out. But maybe that was the only clothing he had. So, the guy gets in and sits without uttering a single word. My teacher asks him where he needs to go, and the guy just points forward, and so my teacher drives on. Later, he tried talking to the guy, just trying to make simple conversation, but the guy wouldn't speak or even acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down like he was sleeping. Out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window, and says, "Stop the car now!" My teacher pulls over and lets him out, not wanting to offend the possibly crazy man. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second, and then at a dead sprint just runs off into the fields beside the road until he disappears into the tall crop and out of sight. My teacher waits there for a while, and after a long enough wait, gets back in the truck and starts to accelerate back on the road. The thing about really old trucks is that they don't accelerate very fast. As my teacher got back on the road, he looked in his rearview mirror to check for a safe merge, but there wasn't a car in sight. Instead, he saw the hitchhiker on all fours like a feral animal running after the truck at an inhuman speed. Understandably spooked, my teacher slams the gas pedal as he attempts to go faster, the whole time his eyes glued on the mirror, watching the man chase after his car. Eventually, he was able to get up to speed and lost sight of the guy in the mirror. When he was able to stop at a gas station to use a payphone, he called his wife at home to tell her the story and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her, and he had been talking to her coworker about the hitchhiker. When he asks why she would think that, his wife tells him that at the office in the town she worked in, one of her coworkers told her a story of the exact same thing happening to them. And it's a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with the new girl at work who had to drive home alone at night. My teacher assured her that he was not lying, and she evidently believes him and can vouch for her side of the story, because she showed up to one of our fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, now I just avoid lonely roads in Montana. I live in northern Australia, and everyone growing up in my town knows of the legend of the Poinciana woman. A quick Google search will elaborate into the many variations to the story, but the one I grew up to know is that of a woman who was assaulted by Japanese fishermen, after which she hanged herself from a Poinciana tree when she had discovered she was pregnant. She is also said to appear as a beautiful woman to entice men with her long dark hair dressed in a white gown, and is said to be situated at our army reserve. When I was around 12 and my younger brother 10, he had been in his room and I was in the lounge room on the computer. He had come barreling out of his room, screaming, "Can you hear that? Can you hear that?" before dragging me over to the window. There was a faint feminine moan or hum. We could hear it moving from the window we stood at to the one across the room and back in a clockwise direction. The wind had picked up with the noise despite how still the night had been. The sound became so loud that we were on the floor covering our ears, crying. When I brought it up recently, my brother agrees it was almost as if the sound had been in our heads. This went on for about 10 minutes before abruptly stopping. No wind. Nothing. We found out the next day that our older siblings had been at the army reserve that night before they got home, and had climbed to the concrete pillars to the locked gun turret and had been taunting the Poinciana woman before they left when they heard footsteps, assuming it was security. What creeps me out most is that not long after this happened, I realized that we had a Poinciana tree outside of that window. My mom told me this story about the village where she grew up in Scotland. The village's earliest known settlement is from 3000 BC, so it's old. It's been home to the Picts and Romans, and nowadays there is a small woodland, and the rest of the surrounding land is farmland. The woods used to be much larger. They are what survives of a large forest that almost completely surrounded the village. Legend says the forest was home to witches. When the forest was being cleared for expanding farmland, a lone witch came out of the forest to tell the villagers to stop. She said the trees would not forgive men for their destruction, and if the villagers did not heed her words, then all of their land would become infertile, and all the women too. Frightened, the villagers agreed, but asked for a small part of the forest. A deal was made that this and only this land could be cleared. The witch also said that for every harvest of every crop grown there, one sack must be taken to the edge of the forest and left. This practice was followed for hundreds of years until the villagers abruptly tore down much of the remaining forest to grow wheat and build a mill. Again, a strange woman came from the forest into the village and threatened the villagers. She said that they had broken the promise and would suffer. This time the villagers took the woman and hanged her. Her last words were that the price was now 3 sacks. The man who built the mill was scared, and after the first harvest he took 3 sacks into the woods. Unlike his neighbors, his crops did not fail and his wife became pregnant. Always he paid the woods their due, and before long he was the richest man in the village and had 3 beautiful, healthy daughters. Unfortunately, the man grew greedy and thought he'd no longer pay his 3 sacks. The next morning, his youngest daughter went missing. The whole village came to help look for her, but the man asked that his men run the mill as normal so he didn't lose any money. There was soon a commotion at the mill. Some of the workers had fainted, others were crying, some were shouting. the man came to see what was happening. A horrified worker told him they had started up the mill as normal, but blood had poured from between the stones. They had found his missing daughter. Distraught, the man sold his land and fled the village with his family. The mill was torn down, and years later, a silo was built there. By the 1960s, the silo was ancient and crumbling. It was also rumored to be haunted, either by the farmer, his daughter, or the witch, sometimes all three. This part is my mom's story. One day, she and her friends had a bet to see who would spend the night in the silo. One boy who was always boasting of his bravery volunteered. Between them, my mom and her friends conspired to keep this a secret from their parents by lying about camping in each other's gardens. That evening, the boy, John, climbed the silo loft, and my mom and her friend gave him a bag of wood, a blanket, and a torch. They told him they'd be back in the morning, but were actually planning on coming back later to frighten him. They had waited a few hours and snuck back to the silo, and alarmingly they could hear John sobbing and crying for help. They found him quite away from the silo, pulling himself along on his stomach. John had jumped out of the silo loft and broken his ankles. He was carried back to his parents' house and taken to a hospital. After the inevitable week of punishment, my mom was allowed to visit John. She said he still looked as terrified then as he had that night, and so she asked him what happened. He said he told his parents and the doctors that he fell, but the truth was he saw something. Not long after he was left on his own, he could hear something shuffling around in the loft. He used the torch to see, but there was only empty grain bags. He tried to ignore the noise, but finally it sounded like it was moving toward him. When he shone the torch on the grain bags again, he saw that they were crawling, dragging themselves along the floor toward him. That's why he jumped. The silos long been demolished, but they've built homes there now. Well, that wraps up the second video I've ever made on this channel. What did you think about these stories? Do you believe them? Also, if you don't wish to be cursed for all eternity, do click the subscribe button and turn on all notifications as to not miss any future videos. While you're at it, give this video a thumbs up as well. Thank you very much, and goodbye, Darklings.